Okay, let's go ahead and get started. If you're having a side conversation, we'd appreciate if you do that in the hallway. This is quick. We have 2 hours today, and I believe 2 hours tomorrow, or an hour and a half? 2 hours tomorrow. We're having a bit of an issue with the screens in the room, so we're going to ask you to follow along. Oh, even that one went away now. That's not great.
But now we definitely have to follow.
Yes, so we're going to ask folks to follow along on your own laptops. We don't have a tremendous amount of presentation or visual aid. Sorry? This one is, and it's fine right there, but these ones are not working. And that one was working, but it was turned off. That one was working, but now it's off.
Is it a resolution thing? How high is the resolution?
Not terribly high.
No.
It worked, and it worked when we first came in the room. We hope you like the shade of green. Okay. So I'm going to ad-lib the note well. Do we have scribes? We have, and for the entire session? Thank you.
I think we have Brian in the Etherpad scribing for us, and if you want to help him out, please do so. Backup is Tommy. Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you. So we have JavaScribe. We have a scribe. We'll go ahead and circulate the blue sheets. Please sign them. Our agenda is pretty monolithic. Today we're going to have a brief discussion of the hackathon, the interrupt event, excuse me, and then we're going to get straight into issue discussion. We're going to follow the practice that we started, I think a couple of interrupts or interims ago now, where we're just going to go through the issues list and try and address each issue as well as we can. That will carry into Wednesday, and we'll wrap up with some brief discussion of next steps, future planning, and if we have time, we may have one or two, as time permits, presentations, although I think it's pretty likely we won't, just because we have a fair number of issues open. Any agenda bashing? It keeps on, no, okay. So if the screens were working, you would now see a lovely slide that starts with note well. We have the small one in the middle if your eyesight is especially good. If you're not familiar with this concept, please use your favorite internet search engine to search for IETF Note Well. That should take you to a description of the terms under which we all participate here regarding important things like intellectual property and how you share it or how you disclose it and the requirements to do so. Also things like the anti-harassment procedures. We expect this to be a professional environment. Copyright, patents, so forth and so on. There's a lot of process document and policy documents around that, so if you're not familiar with it, please do familiarize yourself with it. It's important to what we do here. Still no screens, okay. So let's go into the issues. Sorry, let's go into the hackathon report. Lars?
Can you put the slides up from the... But while Mike posts the slides that I showed at the end of the hackathon, one thing I want to mention, I sent an email to the list about it. So we got feedback that it's hard for people who aren't following like every single day for several hours to find out what things are happening related to Quick that are not like chartered work at the moment, but are sort of interest. And we started a wiki on the GitHub wiki page where we collect those. And that collection basically has like a little, blurb on what is this thing, and then where do I go for more information and where do I go to participate. So if you have something that's Quick related, there's a few things that we know about that are on there that could use some detailing, but if you are interested in working on something or you are working on something that isn't there, feel free to add it and help other people find that work. We're not, as Mark said, going to have a lot of time to talk about this in the working group session because we are still struggling with the issue list, but that shouldn't stop people from having side meetings on things they want to do in the future. Right. And it keeps flickering in and out. So you can go to the next few slides. Not that one. Right. So this is our beloved interrupt Google Docs sheet. which is getting very hard to read because we had 19 implementations that participated. Most of them both have a client and a server. You see some white rows and columns. That is because the -22 drafts dropped really, really close to the interrupt, and some stacks simply haven't had the time to update from -20. But we expect that to change. One new thing is that we have now 3 lines of tests, if you will, where we record the results in 3 lines, the third line being HTTP3 related tests. In the past, we just had one test that basically said, you know, if I send you an H3 request, do I get an H3 response? Now there's a few more feature tests, and we expect that to broaden out further in the future. But the summary, again, is that we're still lacking implementation and interrupt of some very, very basic features. Like I would say half the stacks still don't do key updates. And migration is still quite untested. Recovery is looking a little bit better. I'll get to that in a minute, but we certainly not where we thought we were. Part of that is, I think, that so we have this draft called the invariance that I've decided I'm just going to call the variance for now until we actually stop changing it. So the implementations are still not at a state where they can, you know, concentrate on evaluating feature interop. It's just, you know, keeping up with the change churn that takes the effort. Right. One thing that's on the positive side was the next slide. If you can go down one more. They can't see that. It's a graph. Oh, wow. They can't see it because what the hell happened there? So Jana and Martin Seaman have worked on a little side project that lets you plug your existing quick client and server implementation in a simulated NS3 topology that defines a network topology, and it also defines simulated cross-traffic. So you can now do repeatable recovery testing, which is great. And Robin Marks and Victor have 2 tools that are basically equivalent, and you can translate from one to the other that generate a log file and that you can visualize. And what's on the slide there is a visualization of a transfer that's happening from one quick client to one quick server through a simulated NS3 topology with cross-traffic. And it looks pretty cool, and you can see on the bottom, but you probably can't, but there's the, you know, the seesaw pattern in the RTT that you would expect to see if 2 things are doing Reno-style congestion control and then meeting in the queue somewhere. So this is really cool, and this now lets people that have an interest in congestion control, but maybe are not intimately familiar with the different logging formats of the quick implementations to actually play around and see if they can improve things for us. So this is, I think it's a nice milestone. It's early days for this still. More work will be needed. I'm pretty sure that Martin and Jana would love for people to help with this, especially students, right? If you want to do congestion control with quick, it's easier now. So that's a highlight for me from the hackathon. Any feedback from anybody else?
Yeah, I think Marcus is not here. But
can you go really close to the microphone because you're very hard to hear?
Do you hear me? Just to say that there was a lot of work on the spin bit table too, about, you don't hear?
The acoustics are really bad because the monitor speakers all point your way and not our way. So if you speak louder, we will hear you.
Yeah, just to say quickly that on the spin bit table during the hackathon, there was a lot of work on the push of codes and different implementation to measure packet loss and so on.
Thank you. So one thing I think maybe it's worth spending just a minute, physical face-to-face interrupt versus, thank you, physical face-to-face interrupt versus the virtual interrupts. Do we have any, as a group, any feelings about which is more effective or whether we should focus on one or the other? Any thoughts there? Lars, any thoughts?
What I've heard is that if you're in the North American time zones, the virtual interrupts work quite well. It's a little bit more difficult if you're not, but that's to be expected. I certainly think we don't want to stop doing the virtual interrupts. I think the question is, do we want to reduce the frequency the physical ones, right? Because they're obviously costly. Personally, given the results, I'm not sure if we should at the moment, but that's one opinion. Eric.
Eric Kinnear, Apple. So I think
Please closer to the mic. It's really hard for us to hear.
I think the virtual interops are great, and it's nice to have kind of intermediate deadlines to help move people forward and give everybody a date where we say, yes, we'll be online, and that's a little painful for people in other time zones. But the face-to-face interops, there's nothing quite like sitting down next to somebody and actually looking side by side and comparing and saying, okay, this is exactly what's happening. And so I think we've been able to track down a number of kind of finicky, weird issues that we wouldn't have otherwise found when we were face-to-face. And given where we are in terms of how the implementations are coming along, I think we're in a place where we probably still need some of that.
While you're all up there, if you have any thoughts about whether it's still necessary to have 2 days of the face-to-face, that'd be interesting to hear as well, or on the interims.
2 days versus fewer or more?
2 days versus, oh, okay.
Either. It's too good. Would you want to have one? Would you want to have three?
David Skenazy, Google. So +1 to everything Eric said. I think there is a lot of value in both the virtual interops and the in-person ones. If only like we all have day jobs, and having some like magic deadlines that force us to get stuff done, match the drafts, is a really good thing. And regarding the in-person meetings, I think London was the first time, at least in my personal experience, that the interop became more useful than the issue discussion. So maybe from now, like spending more time on interop could be a good thing. And also, I think it might also just happen naturally because we have less and less issues. The documents are getting closer to ready.
Yeah, that was the hope, right? That we would eventually maybe stop needing working group meetings, and we could just do interrupts because they're also easier to host, because it's not all the people will show up for both.
Kazuho, firstly, I like to ask people to keep the in-person interrupts as we have done, because it is extremely difficult for people living in Far East Asia to attend an interrupt that's mainly happening across the Atlantic Ocean, because it's the opposite side of the world.
A very brief comment on the 2-day thing. I think it's really nice to be able to discover some issues and then go spend the evening fixing them and then come back the next day and keep going. So I wouldn't go less than 2 days, but more might be fine.
Lucas Pardee, Cloudflare. Just to reiterate Eric's point, it might not be that locally we work on those issues, but the attendees at the face-to-face interop are channeling a team that are remote, and they may be in a different time zone. So being able to have that at another day at least, to then come back the next day and retest, is really useful.
Thank you. That's really good feedback. Anything else on the hackathon or the interrupts? Okay. Yeah. So related to that, excuse me, we are at this point planning, starting to plan an interim meeting in the September-October timeframe. It's pretty clear that we're going to need to discuss issues. It's pretty clear that we need to do more interop work. And so I know that we've been doing this for a while and that some people are getting a little exhausted, but we need at least one more. In our rotation, historically we've rotated one interop and one interim meeting in Asia Pacific, one in North America, and one in Europe. And so in our rotation, the next one should be in North America. We're having a lot of trouble finding a host for that meeting. We have a few folks looking for rooms in their companies this week, and we're hoping that that will eventuate something that we can announce to you by the end of the week or early next week. But if you have a meeting room at your company that you think is suitable for our requirements, and if you're not clear about what those requirements are, please come to talk to Lars and I. We're really looking for more facilities where we can host these meetings. It's kind of a tough set of requirements, and that's why we're having trouble, I think. So yeah, if you know something, please do come to us. But with any small amount of luck, one of the avenues we're chasing will become fruitful, and we'll have an announcement of an interop / interim meeting in September, October. I think right now we're looking at the week of October 7, but we're also open to other dates potentially. Anything else on that?
We are supposed to present from the Chromebook if that's possible, because that apparently works.
Okay. That's the Chromebook, right?
I have no idea what the Chromebook looks like.
It's a Chromebook.
It says Samsung. I don't know. Oh!
Thank you. Oh, okay. Okay.
Are you sharing protected media?
Not to my knowledge. Okay.
Not security, awesome.
Right. So we're going to need a second to get into the right state here. How do I
don't know.
Google people?
Oh.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
How do I quit an application?
It's Firefox.
What?
You should know.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Wait a second. Okay. But it worked when we came up here. That was the weird part.
It's time for Google Co-Chair.
What are you saying? Come on.
Third one.
Uh-huh. Okay. So let's not join GitHub today. So this is kind of the project board on GitHub that we've been using to keep an eye on the issues lists. And if I look at this, so as we mentioned last time, Lars and I regularly triage new issues to figure out if there are design issues, editorial issues, or they need to be thought about and discussed a little more before we accept them as issues. The current design issues list is the one we're going to be interested in today. How do I scroll? No.
No.
Oh. Okay. I'll just drag. And so you can see we have 22 design issues open. It's 23 because of the note up here. We did this at our last, okay. We did this at our last interim meeting. And as you can see, we assigned a number of these issues to different people to go off and work a proposal based upon the discussion we had at the interim meeting. And we were hoping we'd be able to close on those in the time between that meeting and now. We still have a lot of those open because a lot of those proposals have not eventuated. And so I think what we're going to do today is discuss the newer issues and try and get a better understanding of them and assign an owner to them to come up with a PR or a proposal for the disposition of that issue. But for the ones where we already assigned an owner, our question is going to be, have you made any progress? Do we need to assign a new owner? We really need the participation of the folks who are part of this process to come forward and make these proposals to be able to close this out.
And I think not now, but if this keeps, happening, we're going to be closing some with no action that we don't deem critical for some definition of critical, because it's easy. It's still too easy to open new issues, and the follow through isn't quite there. This is not the fault of the editors, right? This is the fault of everybody that is opening more issues than we can close. And we always get the question, when are we going to get to some new cool stuff like media or multipath or something else? And the answer is when the issues list is under control, and it's not under control. And we always say, by the next meeting, hopefully, but it's not been happening.
Right. And to that, point earlier of exhaustion, if we keep on doing this for another year or two, I'm concerned, I think we're concerned that we're going to lose implementers, we're going to lose interest, and the effort will fail. And so we need to focus and get these final few issues. I mean, it's 22 issues. It's not that many, considering how many we've closed, how very, very many we've closed to date. So let's do a final push and get these done so we can really get a good set of drafts out that we can start thinking about working group last call on. Excuse me. Yes, I said working group last call. Not yet. Don't be so self-congratulatory. Hey, if we can get consensus to close all these issues, we can close all these issues today. But I don't think we're going to get there. Let's see. So Let's go ahead and go through these. If you're aware of a dependency or a relationship to another issue, please say so. These aren't in any particularly special order, but we'll just go through and try and get as much done as possible. First one, 2792, Martin Seaman. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this issue? I can't scroll.
On the microphone.
I can't scroll. Where's the scroll bar? Oh, there it is.
Oh, Sean's volunteered to take this one. Where's Sean?
Martin Seaman?
Do you have a solution to this, Sean? Because I don't. And I've thought about it a little bit.
Can we do another one first, he's asking?
Extremely difficult to hear you guys here up here. I'm very
I'm
sorry.
sorry, I'll project. I've thought about this a little bit, not a lot, and it's hard. And I'm not sure that it's worth addressing without anything other than maybe text. I'd like to hear what other people
So
think.
do I hear you correctly that you think that this is an issue we should not try to address in version 1 of Quick?
That may be the case. I'd like a little bit more time to think about it, but at current pace, I'd rather not.
So I guess, Eric Squirrel, I don't actually understand this issue. If we have a, so it seems to be, so reading this first paragraph, the fact that the key is computed and received the packet is a side channel that might be used to recover the header protection key. If it's possible to recover the header protection key from measuring the cost of computing it, then we have problems all up and down the stack because we're constantly doing it.
Sorry, Ecker, can you please speak directly into the microphone?
Yes, if it's possible to recover the header protection key from the cost of computing it, of doing some other computation or doing any of these computations, then we have problems all the way up and down the stack.
Yeah, I think that's an overstatement of the problem here. I think the problem is probably limited to the fact that you learn when a key update happens and can maybe trigger one.
Right, but if I'm reading the next two paragraphs correctly, there's a perfectly fine countermeasure, which is to pre-compute the next key, and
Which you do at the time that you compute at the time of the previous key.
or you
update.
do it in the background, or you do it
Yeah,
after, or you do it
right.
after packet processing, or you do
Sure.
87 other ways.
Yep. That's what I was saying. I thought about this a little bit. I don't think it's worth doing anything much to solve the problem, whatever the problem is.
I mean, I guess I just don't understand. But what is the problem when information is the attacker learning? Let's start with the statement of what the attacker is learning. Okay, I propose we not discuss this until someone can tell me what the attacker is learning.
Yeah, and so I was mostly going to second Martin's comment that I don't think we necessarily need to do anything about this. If we understand it better, maybe we can write it up in security considerations. Besides that,
Oh, okay. That's daring. This is how Lars gets killed by a falling speed. Okay. Oh, hey, that's actually a bit better. Cool. You may be disadvantaging these people here. But okay. Can Kazuho, can you still hear me? Okay. Okay, cool. Anyone want to speak up for keeping this issue open? Martin, did you want more time to think about this, or are you comfortable saying?
Right now, I'm happy with maybe Martin Seaman if you want to think about this more yourself and come back with some proposed text. But I'm happy with saying the onus is on someone else and we can close it here rather than doing anything concrete.
So you're saying security considerations text?
If that.
If that.
Security considerations text, if such text materializes. Now,
Right.
if Sean, who's put his name on this, has some ideas, or if Martin, who opened it, has some ideas, that would be fine. But
Okay.
I'm
Oh,
not
I didn't
gonna-
see it on itself.
I don't want to hold this up for this particular issue. It's
Okay.
a bit hard to pin down.
Does anyone think we need more than security considerations text on this? Okay. That seems like the direction we'll try and go into. Shut up.
Iyengar, do you want to mark this as something other than design then?
I can't understand a word you're saying. Mark it as something other than.
I was recommending Quick V2.
Well, that gets closed.
Well, if it's V2, it's closed and it's not going to get any text in the document.
Yeah.
But we do take pull requests for editorial suggestions of the nature of the.
I'm a little
We're
uncomfortable with adding security considerations text through that mechanism.
Okay.
We can review it if it materializes.
You want to
It-
close
we-
issues.
We could also.
I want to close issues, yeah.
Yeah. I
I
think
do
it's not
too.
a bad idea to have at this point. If somebody's volunteering to provide text for this, I think we should keep it open. Otherwise, you can't hear me. Can you?
No, we need a John Whisperer.
All right. I'm saying, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Lars, can you hear me?
understands.
So, I mean, I think that, so I'm actually with Martin on closing stuff, right? And sure, we can leave this open, but that's not really gonna get our issue list under control, right? So, I mean, unless somebody puts up here and puts the PR together, right?
I just want to make sure that if we get to working group last call and there's no text about this in the document, that's not going to come up again. As long as we're in that state, let's go ahead and close the issue. When? Can you write something tonight?
Can we have this discussion on the mic, please?
Sure.
It's a big
Martin's
room.
suggesting he can write something, but not before September, probably. I would say that then my inclination would be to close the issue, and if you want to come up with some text, the editors can consider that, and if they think it's not editorial, we can bring it back to the group. You need to go to the mic, Martin.
So, Martin, please come to the mic. I don't agree this is an attack, but I'm willing to consider the fact.
So this is a timing side channel. That
Very
needs
close
be
to the microphone,
resolved.
please.
This is a timing side channel, and we need to resolve it. I can't come up with a PR until tomorrow, but I can work on it after this meeting.
Can you
All right.
please state what the timing side channel is? Because I don't understand it yet.
The timing side channel is that the spec currently says that you compute the key as soon as you receive a packet with the new key face.
What is the attacker learning?
Excuse me?
What is the attacker learning? What information does the attacker learn?
It's the same timing side channel we have with the reserved bits and with the packet number.
Okay, but this doesn't say packet number. It says recover the header protection key. So is that just wrong?
Yeah. We have text about this for the packet number decryption. So either it's not, we agree that the header protection key.
So concretely, we have a very clear definition of what it means to do remove packet protection, and that includes removing the header protection. And Martin's point is that in the case where you see that bit flip, the middle of that process contains a non-constant time operation, which is generating a new set of keys. The fix would be to generate the next set of keys some other time.
Again,
could write
what
that down.
information does the attacker learn? You're not telling me.
The attacker learns the value of the key phase bit.
The attacker learns the value of the key state bit. Okay, that's not what this says.
Right. I'm not sure this is particularly serious or anything, but we need to maybe acknowledge it. That's all.
Can we suggest that
Well,
three of you
let's
gonna
take
have
the
lunch
three of us
together?
offline and we'll deal with this.
right? Okay. So we're gonna deassign it from Sean. I don't know why it's Sean's, and we're gonna give it to Martin Seaman.
But Martin Seaman, I just want to, can you nod or not nod? The outcome here is at most security consideration text. Is that what you're thinking? The outcome would be at most security consideration text, not a protocol change. Do you agree with that? He says probably, yeah.
I think probably yes, though we may change the description of how head protection works to avoid the
Fair enough.
inferring something.
But,
Yeah.
sure, but not an actual protocol change. Yeah. Okay, let's move on then. Next, oh, what happened there? You get to see Mark learn how to use a Chromebook. Badly. There we go. Thank you. Next up is 2670, remove active play exponent TP. Nick Banks, are you with us?
Mr. Nottingham, you'll find that there are slides on this question in the materials.
Okay. Right.
This is a fun one.
Coming up. This 26, this one here?
Oh, there's Ted. Okay, good. I want to see his face when we do this one.
Oh, full screen.
Acknowledgement delay. Yeah. Can we get rid of the notification and make it full screen? Next page, please. When you.
Okay. No.
You need to use the arrow keys rather than the space.
Ah.
I don't know. Who designed this system? All right, so we have a number of options that we've been discussing on the issue, and it seemed like it was not going to resolve on the thread because we had weak preferences in every direction. It's one of those wonderful scenarios where there's weak preferences. So I'm going to go through the three options. This is what Nick proposed, which is to remove the scaling of the act delay parameter. For those people who are not aware of this, we express the time that the stack holds on to, delays the acknowledgement of an ACK eliciting packet. And we express that in microseconds, but we have a scaling parameter that's exchanged as a transport parameter. This one would say, remove that. And the advantages of doing that is it's much, much simpler. The disadvantage here is that as a result, you're encoding larger values for your ACK delay, which will take one, maybe three more octets when you encode it. I'll also point out here that if we decide that this was a bad idea in retrospect, adding a transport parameter back for this one is super complicated. So we would be kind of committing to this unless we wanted to revise the protocol completely. Next slide, please. Option B. You might want to hit the full screeny button again. I don't know. Yeah, that might do it. Oh, that doesn't work.
No.
God, wait, terrible thing, isn't it? Yeah. All right. Option B. We express the ACK delay with a, thank you, Miriam, with a scaling parameter, just like this is what we have in the document today, with a shift. So an integer shift. Shift to the left, 3, which is the default, or shift to the right when you're in code. This one can reduce the bytes on the wire. It's very simple to implement. The number of gates that you have to do this, if you're concerned about gates, is trivial. Someone pointed out the fact that if you really have that few gates, then you should probably be ignoring ACK delay. Thank you, Roberto. The disadvantage with this is that if your native time unit is not microseconds, then you end up with some bad rounding sometimes if you want to keep the scaling in use. And then some multiplication and division in that case anyway. Next, please. Right arrow. Yeah, there we go. And what was proposed on the thread is multiplicative scaling, which basically says we just multiply a number rather than shifting it. which degenerates to a shift if you choose certain values. And arguably it's the most complex, but really we're not talking about complexity here. These are not complex options, and that's change. Kazoo, a clarification?
Yes, clarification. I don't think that divide is required for send because the sender has.
Yes, that's a good point. I should have made that point already. But as you say, you can pick an exponent of 2, and then you can do it as a shifted rather than a divide. Next, please.
The problem with the multiplication is not that it's more expensive, it's that it's error prone.
Acknowledged. The error prone was the point. Again, emphasizing that this is not very important, I'm proposing here that we invoke the alternative decision-making process here. And that is documented in 3929. The process would require us all agreeing to adhere to that process, and then voting. No matter what Dave Clark says, we do vote. So can I ask the chairs to run this? And I'll sit down on the floor, because I don't think I've got anything more.
Sure. So to be clear, we are choosing between option A, B, and C?
These seem to be the options. We have some interesting combinations of people with different preference orders, so I'd rather just... one last point. The discussion on the issue made it very clear that we wanted a negative vote. So rather than voting for A, we would want to hear the people who hated A. Of course. Because that, you can't live with A. And we may find that there's silence on all 3 options, in which case we might have to find some other way.
So it seems like our first question should be to see if everyone agrees that there's not a strong view, and so that this is the appropriate process to use. Ted is stepping back from the mic.
As the author of those things.
Okay. Do people have thoughts? Does anyone disagree with that statement that there are not strongly held views here, and so we just need to make a decision?
Martin Duke, I'm unclear about the procedure. So if we slightly prefer one, are we not supposed to hum because we can live with anything?
If you slightly prefer one of them, it depends on how slight it is, of course, but if you want to express that preference, you would hum for the other 2.
Thank you.
Ted Hardy, as author of RFC 3929, I would actually suggest one of the other procedures in 3929 for this, which is the pick somebody and make them decide procedure. The working group can hum to accept that instead of the working group make the choice, if you get to that point, you can simply pick somebody by lot from the working group and say they're going to decide. If what Martin said was true, that there's pretty much equal selections among the different potential choices here, then that one is far faster. And I suggest you do it rather than a vote.
So Ted, I think there's sort of, it's rather equal amongst the people who've expressed an opinion on the issue.
No, I was going to correct that one.
Okay, go ahead.
From my reading of this, and this is just my reading of this, one of the options is distinctly less preferred than the others, but that may complicate Ted's suggestion a little. My reading is that A is much less preferred, but there are a few people who are advocating for that.
Ted Hardy speaking again. If that's the case, then if you're selecting it by random lot, then there's a fair chance that you'll get somebody who doesn't like A because there are more of them. But there's always a chance that you will end up with one of the people who likes A as a result of that. But the whole thing and all of this is predicated on the idea that everybody can handle any of them, that it's a preference, but we all agree that the technical choices here all do the work, and it's just a question of whether you can get to a decision that we all agree we can all accept. And so if you want to do it with a vote, sure. But the other one would be faster.
Although we're spending time talking about how to make the vote, so I think we have to factor that in too. Does anyone disagree with the statement that Ted just made, that all of the options are technically viable and that this is just a matter of preference?
Christian said no.
Christian said no. You need to get to the mic if you want to explain that.
I mean, so we were totally fine with whittling this down now too, right? I mean, we don't have to do it this way, but the discussion so far on the issue. Do I need to?
Because there are announcement requirements and other things in RC 3929, if you can just come to an agreement here, that's even faster.
Yeah. Christian.
Well, the concern with option A is that it will increase overhead. And so I don't know how much of a concern it is, but it is a concern that has driven us all around this design. And typically the ACK delay could be something like a quarter of the RTT. So that means increasing the overhead of packets by a byte or two. So I would like to have a discussion, like a hum, is that do people believe that it is not a valid concern? Or the contrary? Because if people do not believe it's a valid concern, then option A is just fine. If they do believe it is not, and that's a binary decision.
Can I? No, I'll let Cory speak first.
So Gory Fairhurst, a not very helpful comment, but I don't have any data on this. I do have high RTT paths. I do care about overhead. Has anybody measured it? If we do A, if we don't do A, then I will perfectly punt.
So maybe the amendment that we need to do is A versus B and C, and then if it goes to B and C, we decide between those two. Would that be reasonable?
That seems to have support in the room.
Okay.
Andrew?
Andrew McGregor, Fastly. The issue with this is that we're communicating a whole lot of excess precision that is useless. Right? And so B, I think, is preferred over this because it removes the overhead and it means we're not communicating useless excess data.
So should we proceed in that fashion and go A versus B and C and then see how we go from there? Yep. So I think we'll just do a straight hum. Who prefers A and then who prefers B or C? In other words, no scaling or some form of scaling. Are we ready to make that decision? Or at least gather that data? No, we're not doing that. This is a normal, everyday, pedestrian IETF hum, such as it is. So the first hum, again, is if you prefer the option A, which is no scaling. You don't believe we need scaling. The second hum will be you believe we need some form of scaling without talking about which particular form that will take. Is that clear? Okay. Please hum now if you believe we do not need scaling. Please hum now if you do not believe we need scaling. I hear what one might interpret as one person humming if we weren't trying to de-anonymize that data. Please hum now if you believe we need some form of scaling. That seems like an extremely clear result. For the record, there is a strong sense in the room that we need some form of scaling. Martin.
Can I request that when you phrase the next hum, you put the word now at the end and not at the beginning? Thank you.
What?
You said, please hum now if blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
Invert the
pedantry noted.
Pedantry noted.
So are we ready to decide between option B and option C? Do we believe we have all the information available?
There's no other option.
I'm going to ask again 2 questions. I will ask you to hum for option B, exponential, and then I'll ask you to hum for option C, multiplicative. You can hum for both if you have no preference or you have some other state where you believe that both are okay. So please hum if you believe we should do exponential scaling. Now. Okay, thank you. And please hum if you believe we should do multiplicative scaling now. Someone's trying to over-egg the pudding over there.
I would, the first one was very, very slightly louder, but it's by no means clear.
We have working group members who are suggesting we use the process of coin flipping pioneered in the HTTP working group. That requires the working group as a whole to buy into the fact, or to the notion that it's more important to make progress than it is to get what you want. I hear, well, give me the coin just in case, because I'm always willing to accept money.
Get it back, though.
This is goes with the pushes.
Ian.
Ian's about Google. I did want to comment that one of them is currently in the draft and in all the implementations, and the other one isn't. Like, can we just do nothing and move on with this?
That's a pretty good point, Ian.
Why are you not chair yet, Ian?
Yeah.
No, he should be AD. That's next level.
Yeah, I've been like messaging people offline to be like, can we just not do anything? So I rise to support Ian on this. Like, let it be.
Okay.
If that's an argument we are using, we can use that for a lot of issues. I don't think that's a tenable argument, though. There are people who are interested and want to change the code to be multiplicative. It's one operation. It's not a lot of change to code.
Martin Duke, I agree with Ian and Ecker, just because I don't think it is a big deal. I don't think anyone's going to be dramatically affected, and just reducing churn and change and PRs and consensus calls at this point is quite valuable. And my preference for B is not at all technical. It is solely to not unnecessarily shift the standard for non-critical reasons.
So it sounds like the proposal, which has a non-trivial amount of support, is to close this issue with no action because it's already in the spec. Do we have anybody who believes that we shouldn't do so and it already hasn't been discussed? Can we just move on?
I do want to make the technical point that there is a difference between the two mechanisms. With a shift, you do, it's natural to go from microseconds to milliseconds by dividing or multiplying by 1000. It's not 1024. I know it's a simple and silly, perhaps a minor point, but milliseconds to microseconds is a multiplication by 1000, not a shift by 10. I mean, it just is simply what it happens to be. If you want to approximate it to be 1024, that's the discussion you want to have there.
Kazuho, firstly, I completely agree with what Jana said now. On the other hand, people who want precision can always use a scaling of 1, and that effectively force them to go back to option A. And so maybe we can ask to people preferring option C if they can live with using scaling 1. And then, if the answer is yes, we can leave the design as is.
Christian Ritema. Really, if the problem is conversion from microseconds to milliseconds, or having the multiply, you can deduce your multiply from the sheet value. That's not an issue. I I am really wondering why people are so concerned about that. Optimize your damn multiplication, that's all. I mean, come on. We have modern CPUs, they are pipelining many implementation. You're not getting into CPU stall there. I have a hard time believing that it has any effect whatsoever on the grand performance of the thing.
So from a design perspective, why would you use a shift? You would use a shift to save bytes because a shift is smaller than a multiplier. But this is a value that's sent once in the transport parameters, so we don't really have to pay anything for making it a multiplier.
No, in order to unpack the ACK frames, you need to apply this value that's negotiated in the transport parameter to the value in the ACK frame. So it's for every ACK frame.
David Skenazy, Google. Question about process. This is a change to the transport doc, and the transport doc is under the late stage process. My understanding of that process, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was that if something doesn't have working group consensus, then we close it with no action and move on with our lives. If clearly this doesn't have consensus, why are we still going around in circles?
That's part of the adoption process for adopting new issues. It doesn't change the core consensus process of how we close issues.
Thank you.
So it appears that we wouldn't be able to do a coin flip, for example, now, because it seems people do still have some strong feelings. Having said that, it seems like a large part of the working group does want to just move on.
So my suggestion would be that there was some discussion after the hum, specifically Ian made this comment, and I would rerun the hum one more time to see if anybody's mind has changed. And if we're still split, right,
Yeah.
worry about it then.
There was also Kazuo's assertion.
Roberto and Martin.
I would rather have any result than have to talk about this more. But just in case we actually have to have one, I'm going to point out that in option C, if you choose 0, you're going to have some problems. And in option B, if you choose 0, nothing happens. And it just works.
Okay, I'd like to do another hum, so let's drain the queues quickly.
Well, I've now invented option C prime, which is that it's C, except it's the multiplier -1.
I'd like helpful discussion at the mics, please.
Doesn't fit in the variant.
That's what we actually
Okay.
do here.
Let's do another hum. A normal, everyday IETF vanilla hum. Option B versus option C. If you prefer option B, please hum now. If you prefer option C, please hum now. That seems like clear support for option B to me. Great.
Let's minute it.
Martin.
Did I just hear from people that they were unwilling to change their implementations?
I couldn't hear that.
Did I just hear from people that they're unwilling to change their implementations?
That is one
That's
way
really
to
what I'm hearing
interpret that.
from that's what I'm interpreting from this one. That's an interesting sign, I'd have to say. Because that's what turned that one,
Right.
if I'm reading that.
And to be clear, we don't make our decisions based just on hums. If people have technical arguments that they think will change people's minds, please bring them now. But so far, we're not hearing them. We're not hearing the minds change. We're hearing the minds pretty much focusing on option B. Let's drain the queues relatively quickly. Ecker?
Sure. I mean, Martin, that wasn't my primary motivation. My primary motivation was we have something in the spec. Like, if it's fine, then like I don't want to like go over it again and again. Implementation, I don't think is a big factor, at least for us. Like as Ian said, if it were C, I'd probably be. If C were in the spec, I'd probably be like fine.
Martin, do. Okay. Eric, let's take it home. Wow. Okay. All right, let's move on then. Okay. Push this button. Right. Can you record that? Thank you. Oh, the scrolling in the other direction. Okay. 2844, David Shkenazi. Please walk us through this.
David Skinazi, Google. So this issue came out from discussions on some other issues where basically we realized that as currently defined in the document, the client connection IDs don't actually accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. So in QUIC, the goal of the connection ID is when you receive a packet, it allows you to identify which connection this packet maps to. And there are cases where you don't need those. Let's say as a client, if you have one USB port per connection, you don't need to multiplex, they all go to the same connection, so you can use zero-length connection IDs. That was kind of the rationale behind them in the first place and how I personally have been reasoning about them. Except in the current document, it says that the server can decide to use zero-length connection ID even when it cannot multiplex. And then that has a whole bunch of repercussions, such as, oh, when you do that, the client's no longer allowed to migrate, or if there's a NAT rebinding, everything crashes and burns. And so what I'm proposing, and I have a PR for this, is to say that you can use zero-length connection IDs if you can demultiplex without connection IDs. It's pretty simple. A connection ID is something that is only in the direction towards you, and that's how you use them. That makes the spec a bunch simpler, removes a bunch of text and stuff that was disallowed, and I don't think the one use case of a server who wants to use zero-length connection IDs and multiplexing is a very useful use case.
So, Martin Thompson, I just labeled this proposal ready. We've had a bunch of discussion on this one. It slipped the net. I think David's solution is correct. Using information that you control to ensure the packets are routed to you is very good. Using source address-based routing doesn't work uniformly in this protocol because of the risk of rebindings and migrations.
If that's the case, we can put this through our normal process, see if we can do a consensus call on the list. So if people feel that there are problems with this proposal that would benefit from discussing this room, let's do that now. Otherwise, we'll just do a consensus call on the list.
Igor Lubushev, Akamai. It just seems that this proposal excludes the case of two machines that know that they're not behind nets of any kind, just not using connection IDs. So this requires that server does not use source IP information from the packets. It seems unnecessary if the server knows that the source is not behind nets.
So you are in this context, is there multiple clients talking to that same server on the same port?
Yeah, and just yeah, certainly. Just imagine many machines belonging to, I don't know, Google, whatever, Akamai, that are not behind net. They just want to make a point-to-point connection to each other. They use the same port, but they use the same destination port.
So that breaks connection migration.
Yeah, they're not going to migrate. They're like stationary. They're actual servers, hardwired. They're not mobile.
I honestly think that adds a bunch of complexity for a use case that we're like never, at least like we're never going to use. Like the connection IDs are not a big overhead.
They're not a big overhead, but either you just say, don't always use connection IDs, just forget about it. But why make a statement, must not use source of the packets?
Because it breaks these features that we think are important to the protocol.
Ecker?
Yeah, Eric Sprola. Yeah, I apologize for not noticing this earlier when it was being floated around, a lot of messages going around. I mean, this seems like a pretty substantial deviation from what we previously agreed upon, which was that it was reasonable to build a server which had effectively the same like connection semantics as TCP, which is to say that you used the 5-tuple to demux, and you didn't care about like having that rebinding work properly. And this seems like a pretty substantial change to that, and like that seems like a pretty legitimate thing to want to do. I certainly understand David's point here, but I'd point out that the primary use case David's interested in is not something we're charged to do, and the thing that like is emulating basically HTTP servers is something we're charged to do. And what I just said, the primary thing that that the peer-to-peer use cases are not something we're charged to do. Can I finish? David, are we gonna like argue like back and forth for the mic? Let me say, let me finish. We are not charged to require connection migration. We're charged to allow connection migration. We have an explicit decision that you could just opt out of connection migration if you wanted to. And so while I think it's certainly valuable to be able to indicate to the peer that you'd like them not to use a non-zero, like them not to, that you like them have a non-zero length connection ID, like that's something you could do in an extension. And hard coding of the protocol here in a must seems like walking back something we previously agreed to do. So, and maybe that's reasonable to do, but it's like, I think this is more discussion that we're seeing now.
Can I try to clarify this one? Maybe I can help. So in order to do what Igor is suggesting here, we have a, oh, I apologize, Martin Thompson, for being Martin Thompson. In order for someone to decide that it's possible that they can use some aspect of the source address to determine which connection a packet belongs to, they have to be certain that every single client that they will ever talk to is not going to be subject to migration and is not going to be subject to rebinding. You don't agree with that? That I think was my point. But if that's wrong, I'd like to hear why.
Yeah, it's what Google. I was going to say that in terms of the TCP analogy, it seems like this restriction is fairly analogous to typically how TCP is used, where a client opens an ephemeral port, and hence the local ephemeral port and IP allow it to identify like the connection. So it seems kind of in line with how, I don't know.
Just remind folks to please speak into the microphone directly. The acoustics in here are horrible.
Tommy Polly, Apple. So I was just thinking maybe one solution we could do to modify the existing pull request for this to take into account Igor's thoughts on this is to specify that the server can have zero length connection IDs for itself if it in its transport parameters also disables migration. Right? So we can just say that if you want to do this, explicitly disable migration to not allow it. And that way you, for this point-to-point server use case, that's totally fine. And it essentially generalizes this to not be a client-server thing, but just explains here are the trade-offs of what you have to do.
Eric Kinnear, Apple. Just a brief note on there. I think disable migration is becoming disable active migration because it has nothing to do with NATs. And so I think those things are orthogonal. So if you really wanted to do this, allow the zero length connection ID and remove the transport parameter entirely.
So I think, scroll again, I think what Ian said is actually what I was trying to get at, which is like the way that like your standard like TCP server works now is the client picks an ephemeral port and the server has a static port, and the server uses the 5-tuple that distinguishes the clients. And the client's ports or address changes, then TCP is hosed and like things fall apart. And so it is great that QUIC allows you to, has mechanisms that allow you to survive that. But it is not mandatory. But my point is like, it's perfectly reasonable to say, I don't care about any of those mechanisms. I just want to say that it behaves more or less like TCP. And in those cases, like, why should we have to bear the overhead of having a connection ID? So I certainly understand. Now, David's point, which I agree with, is that if you want to make a peer-to-peer protocol where everybody uses the exact same ports all the time, then you're going to need connection IDs to demux. That's actually, I'm a little surprised you're actually having that problem, but I'm prepared to believe you do. But it seems like the straightforward way to do that is have an extension that says, like, no, listen, you can use a non-zero connection ID. Also, I'm a little surprised in that it seems like that I'm not quite sure I understand what your design is, that you wouldn't know a priori that was not saying you should do, but maybe that's different. But it seems like this seems like something we easily negotiate whatever flag it happened to be. So I'm sort of reluctant to take the feature out at a must level here when you can negotiate the converse.
Hi, Brian Trammell. I think I'm here to say what Ecker said, but I trailed off at the end because the acoustics in here really suck. the TCP semantics do have the downside that things get screwed up. The world has lived for the past 30 years with those semantics and the past 28 years of NAT, or however long that's been going on. I mean, so these are risks that pretty much everybody, there's connectivity risk in the internet. Yeah, great, we know that. I would essentially support a slight change to this PR that essentially just notes that, hey, if you want to use TCP semantics, great, you get TCP guarantees.
Roberto?
Roberto Peon, Facebook. And yeah, so it doesn't matter if we have functionality that tries to get us around a NAT, because invariably somebody is not going to support all the features that actually make that work, which means that the application stacks are always going to have their timeouts and their reconnects. The timeout and the reconnect is ultimately the only way you're going to get reliability in a vast number of scenarios anyway. It's going to have to be there. Why are we talking about this? Why isn't it just editorial saying that, look, you're going to have to do this sometimes?
David Skenazy. So the problem here is the reason we have client connection IDs is so quick clients can multiplex just the same way that servers do. That as a client, I can run a bunch of connections from the same source port. Otherwise, you don't need them. And most browsers today will use ephemeral ports, won't use them as links, and that's why the Google Quick encoding didn't have those, but we added those client connection IDs to IETF-QUIC to allow this use case. In the current spec, that doesn't work, because if, as a client, I want to create a connection, I don't yet know if the server is using these TCP semantics, and then everything falls over if I put multiple connections on my same local port and the server is using the 5-tuple. So if we don't want client connection IDs to work, then let's just remove them from the spec.
We're thinking about closing the queue soon, by the way. Martin.
So Martin Thompson, I think Eka's point there is a really good one, and mostly convincing for me. I think I'd be almost okay with the idea of what Brian said. If you want TCP semantics, you get TCP guarantees. The only reservation I have, and I'd like people to think about this a little bit, is that this is a unilateral decision in a two-party protocol, and whether or not we need to have some sort of negotiation for that property or not.
Can I just interject there? You said you there. In my mind, I'm wondering if this is a decision that can be made by the application being mapped onto QUIC. Does that help?
That might, yes, but not necessarily. I suspect that this is going to be one of those cases where you have, as Igor has described, a server-to-server scenario where it makes absolute sense to have this for HTTP.
Right. You're saying it might be HTTP as well.
When I put this in my browser, I would rather not have the server unilaterally make this decision for me, because I know that I am mobile. And this is the bit where I have some reservations about simply saying TCP semantics, TCP guarantees.
Roberto.
So I'll say again that we, as a protocol, as a group of people making a protocol, what we are doing is providing potential functionality to endpoints. And these endpoints can decide to not use this functionality regardless of what we spec. In particular, even if we have ConID, it can be ignored by the server. ConID is there for routing for the server in this particular direction. So having this does not guarantee that we get anything better than TCP-like functionality regardless. I will also state that servers who are silly enough to do this globally are going to see much worse outcomes than servers that actually put the ConID on here. If we're worried about performance, this will fix itself. I don't think we need to talk about this deeply, because it's going to fix itself regardless.
So, Roberto, would your proposal be to close this issue with no action? Okay. Igor.
Yeah, basically similar to what Roberto said. If a server has clients that want to migrate and it has zero connection ID, it's just a broken server. But not all servers are designed to serve mobile clients. some servers are designed to serve stationary clients that they really know about, and they know what their properties are, and those should be fine. Those should not be penalized by requiring to have this connection ID that they don't need.
Kazuho, firstly, I'd like to add my +1 to what David says. If we unless we make this change, it is really hard to have one implementation that does both client and server, because the requirements on how the sockets are being mapped to connections becomes different on the client and the server side.
Tommy Polly, Apple. One other proposal for how we could deal with this, given the current conversation, is to kind of take this PR and maybe move it out of the transport to allow the transport to kind of be open to allow any use of connection IDs, and put this into the manageability document, or sorry, applicability document, to give guidance about how to deploy it.
Yep, those are not standard struct. Those are not standard struct documents.
Does guidance on this for how to deploy it need to be standard struct?
If you want a mandatory reference.
So, David Scanazi, I think what it boils down, sorry, Martin described it really well, is that it is a property of the server to want to use old TCP semantics or new quick connection ID semantics. And if we allow it to unilaterally make that decision, then we end up having to negotiate this. And the problem is, this is something that as a client you need to decide before you start your connection. And so you can't negotiate something when you haven't talked to the other side before. And that's why this breaks down pretty quickly.
Andrew, were you in queue?
Yes. I think the proposed change is a strict improvement over the wording in red with a one-word diff on top, which is an endpoint should not use a zero-length connection ID unless. In other words, this is a clearer explanation of what this means and expresses a preference, but if you don't make it a must requirement, then it achieves the same thing as the other wording and lets everybody know what the consequences are.
I'm interested to see what David thinks about that.
So Martin Thompson, while David's going up there, I think that is a good improvement. I don't think it covers the unilateral decision-making process, because the problem here is that we have one endpoint can make a unilateral decision that affects the other endpoint. Now, we can decide that we're comfortable with that, but I don't think it addresses that concern.
So the PR does multiple things. One of them is this must that either Andrew would suggest or should. Another thing is that because we have this must, it allows us to remove a bunch of text. I think further down, keep going. Yeah, that a little bit. That says, oh, if you receive this signal, which is the server is using zero-length connection ID, disable these features. And the problem is if we turn the must up there to a should, then you end up leaving the clients guessing. And maybe we're okay with that, with saying hey, we document this as a server. If you do this, you won't work with some clients. But that has interop risks. If some servers decide to do it and some clients decide to multiplex on their one socket, then things fall over.
Edgar, and then I think we're going to try and find a way to move on.
And I think it's important to recognize we're actually talking about two features which are sort of coupled. One feature is sustaining migration to the other side, and one feature is one feature is having multiple connections on the same host port pair on the other side, and the other is having one connection on two host pairs on the other side. And they're being operated by the same feature, but they're very different from the server's perspective, and they're very different from the respect to the design of the system. So I guess I'm trying to understand mean, it's basically an inherent restriction of TCP that you can't survive, like that you can't have two clients with the same like host port pair on the other side. Like if you're the server, that just doesn't work at all, right? And so I think the question that the way to turn around like Martin's question is like, should we require all quick servers, regardless of what application they run, to support the more rich semantics of allowing the same host port code on the other side, or should we allow them to continue operating TCP semantics? I guess the thing I think it's probably worth trying to coalesce like Roberto's comments and David's comments is like, is this really something which has to be done at the quick scope, or is this something which is an application scope? And are there, in particular, like, does the HTTP using application we are chartered for need that, or is that is merely another application which is coming down later, which then we can layer new semantics on top of?
Yeah. So Martin Thompson, Roberto convinced me off mic that the change that Andrew proposed was sufficient. I think that we should take the PR with the must change to a should, because you have servers out there that can, to Ekka's point there, you have, and it's not applications so much as it is deployments, but you have deployments in which you can make this decision for yourself. And I think that's perfectly acceptable now, based on the conversation I had.
So I don't think we should put this at the application layer, because all of the concepts that this impacts are at the transport layer, connection IDs, migration, and also, like Martin was saying, this is a property of your deployment. Like, is your client sharing a port? Like, my HTTP browser can share a port. It's not a property of the fact that we're running HTTP or something else on top of it. That said, moving this to a should and maybe adding some text on, I can add like a sentence on, here's what will break if you violate this should, and you can do it if you know that it's your network, there are no NATs, yada, 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 then you can do this. But that I would be personally okay with.
Kazuhok, firstly, my preference also goes to having something stronger than should. Maybe something like must, unless you know that the TCP semantics works.
I guess I'm trying to figure out how to close this as well. I guess I'd be comfortable, like with the should piece of the part that Andrew pointed out, and the rest of it, because I think certainly encouraging people not to like rely on TCP semantics is a fine plan. If it turns out that like everyone wants to do that, we can pull that should off later. But I'm less certain about some of the other pieces, which I think will have to not go away in this PR. But we can study that problem. I think I'm less comfortable with this sort of should, unless you like know that the environment doesn't have NATs or those kinds of things. Because I think precisely the point is that like the servers want to tolerate those behaviors. So like I think it's fine to say like here are the shitty consequences that will happen if like if you don't do this. Like I'm happy to have that be like arbitrary, long, and scary. But the point of having normative text that says like you can't do it unless you're and so Kazuha's text is also fine, where it's like don't do this unless you want to tolerate the consequences. But the saying don't do it unless those consequences don't apply is not okay.
Let's see if we can drain the queues quickly on this.
I'm not sure if I am understanding the issue here correctly.
Close to the mic, please.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding the issue here correctly. Let's assume I have a client that always uses the same port to make new connections and wants to use connection IDs to demultiplex. And now the client wants to establish two connections to the same server. Then this will just break, right?
Well, so that's what this PR is saying, is that if the server accepts multiple connections on the same port, it must like use locally connection ID, or should now use connection IDs, because otherwise it will break. So that's the failure mode that we're trying to solve.
Just to clarify there, the endpoint that chooses not to use a connection ID, or that chooses not to use a connection ID, has to use address and port to disambiguate, was the nature of the... but it's its own information that it uses, not the remote sides.
So I think this is an argument to keep it a must and to not make it a should. So we should make it a must because this is this is a decision that the server makes, and the client has no way of knowing. Like, let's assume the client really wants to establish two connections because the server is serving two domains. So it has to know if it's allowed to establish those two connections from the same port, or if it has to open a new socket and establish two connections using two sockets.
Yeah, it's Gazi. So to explain the should, I think, so my personal preference was a must, that's why I put it in there. But the reason I could live with a should is if you only violate that should when you know your clients and your deployment and your network, like that you are aware that this condition won't happen. That's why that allows those use cases to still survive and not have to violate a must. And that's why I'm okay with that. But I would add a couple sentences to be very clear about the conditions.
We want to move to the next issue, but I think what we want to see happening is, David, if you take the action item of revving the PR, we'd see if there's discussion on the issue happening afterwards that lets us, come to consensus on this. It sounds like it's a very small change, and maybe then a not so small amount of discussion. If there's any chance, we can come back to this tomorrow. But we'll see what happens. But that would, I think, be what we're doing in terms of next steps here.
I'll update the PR before tomorrow, and then you can decide if we have time for it tomorrow or not.
Great, thank you. And if you're able to do that and you put something out, please remind us tomorrow so we remember to come back to it. Or let's move on. Next up is unrecoverable loss pattern leads to deadlock, 2863. Martin Seaman? Where are we at with this one?
Can I make a procedural suggestion? This is still being discussed in the design team.
Sure.
So,
not fruitful today?
Yeah, I would punt it for tomorrow.
Okay. Tomorrow might be good? Okay, thank you. That leaves us on 2763, coordinating spin. Martin Thompson? Where are we at?
I think this might be proposal ready. I apologize. There is a PR on this one that removes the offending text. It's very small.
Is there?
Is there? Maybe we didn't link to that one. There.
It's merged.
It's been merged. Why did it happen? Let's discuss whether we think that's a terrible idea.
Okay, it's relatively small. So we remove this text.
So the specific text that's going away, I don't know why. Oh, there's two changes here. One of them takes connections and talks about network paths, which I think is an editorial change. The real substance of this change is that remove paragraph there. No, that was a separate. That was simply a mention of this one. So this PR made some changes to network paths.
Right.
And mentioned the other one. I don't think that's a fix for this one.
It says 27.
That's a different pull request.
This is 2763, right?
But if you go back to that pull request, we can look at that paragraph, because there's a PR that I could find if we could, but we can just look at the green text going down. That paragraph there, it says, in case multiple connections share the same network path, and there's some recommendations here about doing things like coordinating spin. I think we have agreement amongst the people that have participated in the discussion anyway, that this is aspirational at best, and there is a PR, I will find it, I apologize for not linking it properly, that simply removes that paragraph.
Okay. Is it worth discussing this anymore here, or can we just do the normal process in this issue?
I will take the normal process on this one.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, that was 2763. Next up is 2834, long header packets and routing connection IDs. Who's going on?
Hi, Nick Banks, Microsoft. I opened this issue and we had a lot of discussion. Initially, it was essentially stating that in the load balancer statelessly load balancing the long header packets based off of the destination IP address was not possible, but we came up with a solution thanks to Kazuho that you can use the long header source destination connection ID and achieve the results that are needed. So I don't have any further need to keep this open. There's a little bit more discussion, but I'm fine with closing this to no action.
Happy to close with no action?
Yes.
Anyone disagree with that? Okay, I think we'll just do that in the next round of consensus calls. That sounds nice and easy. Thank you very much. Excuse me. That takes us to 2770. Ian, if you want a stateless reset, you need to send a larger packet than before.
There's been a fair amount of discussion. I think we have an approximate proposal. I finally wrote it up this morning, belatedly. So I guess I would say, since I just wrote it up like 2 hours ago, maybe come back to it tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
After people get time to at least read the PR.
That sounds good.
But I think Martin, I, and David all kind of converged in a general shape. It's just a matter of getting the text worded correctly because it's a little subtle.
If I could put the onus on you to remind us tomorrow to discuss that when the time comes.
I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Next up then, 2785, David Shkenazi, to disallow reuse of stateless reset tokens.
It's me again. So the current spec allows, for each connection ID you have locally, you tell the other side what the corresponding stateless reset token is. So that if you receive something later there, you just send a stateless reset and they know that it's a valid stateless reset and they close the connection. At one of the interrupts, one of the implementation was using all zeros for all their stateless reset tokens. And people were like, oh, this is breaking my code. And then someone added text saying, oh, you could do that. So Thompson added some really good text explaining the downside of doing that, which is mainly that if you reuse them, then there are some things the attacker can do. It loosens the security properties of stateless resets. I was wondering if this is actually useful and if we could just, like, instead of having all the text about, oh, here's the caveats, because this is not a useful feature, just say, no, they have to be different and we're done.
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, it's not about losing security properties per se. It's simply about additional steps that you have to take in order to ensure that you retain those security properties, and it goes through what those are. Specifically, if you have two connection IDs that have the same stateless reset token associated with them, you can't forget one or the other. You can't forget one while the other is still in play. Otherwise, you end up with a nice oracle.
And so the question for the group is, do we want to have this complexity in the document, or do we just want to simplify things?
Is there any good reason to reuse them? Like, let's hear that. That's that question.
Kazuho, firstly, so I think we should disallow reuse, because if we are to allow reuse, then we need to reference count on the receiver side the stateless reset tokens. I mean, because many connection IDs might map to a single stateless reset token. Then if you are retiring one of those connection IDs, then you need to decrement the stateless reset token reference counter and then keep it until it becomes 0. So the current state is a unnecessary complication, I say, with a marginal benefit at best. So I think we should remove this and make it simpler.
So you're supporting the proposal?
Just for my benefit, did anyone want to speak for the status quo? Because I'm perfectly happy to just cut that text. Okay, I'll write up a PR.
Sorry, is there a PR for this one?
No, there's no PR, but we've left it in an ambiguous state, so it's good that we had this discussion here.
And are we now placing a requirement upon implementations to generate this protocol violation when one's reused?
The requirement would be that they are unique, or at least probabilistically unique. I'm not going to require that they be unique in absolute terms. Unique within that connection, ideally.
Right.
Well, the scope of uniqueness is another problem I don't want to talk about right now because that's kind of complicated. But you would allow people to generate a protocol violation if they saw a duplicate on the connection.
But allow, not
You would not
require.
require it because tracking all of them is ridiculous. No one's going to be doing that.
That would be the
Martin,
concern.
I would suggest maybe that we require a protocol violation if any currently active. If any two currently active at the same time.
No, because we do have the possibility of forgetting currently active ones. So, yeah. I was almost there with you for a moment, but yeah.
Okay. It sounds like the next step is a PR. We'll go through the normal process.
Martin, do you want to write the PR or should I? All right, cool, thanks.
You're going to write it, David?
Martin said he would.
Martin's going to. Can you assign it to yourself, please? Lars is assigning it 2785. Thank you. That takes us to 2741. Revisit initial keys discard. Ecker?
Yeah, procedural. This is also stalled on the previous keys thing, so we should probably
Punt tomorrow?
Yep.
Please bring it up then. Thank you. And we're getting into the assigned issues, so we're going to start asking if there's progress and if we need to reassign these issues. 2534, ECN text disables ECN too aggressively. This was raised by Martin Duke and assigned to Jana. Jana.
Jana Inger. There's a PR I've written. It's got some comments. It's on me. I'm going to go update it and try to get it through this week.
Okay. Anyone need to discuss anything about this one? Or we'll just wait for that PR and go through the process. Okay. 2656, raised by and owned by Jana. Gents? Okay. Discarding connection state at server on unvalidated clients. Jana.
Jana Inger. So this one, I'm thinking should be marked editorial, but there's a resolution at the end again. There's basically clarification that needs to be added. And this is, yeah, just a sentence or so that I need to add. But it's not a design point. Yes.
So you're proposing to flip this issue to editorial?
Yes.
Okay. If folks have a look at that, if anyone has an issue with that, please bring it up now or on list or to the chairs. Otherwise, we'll flip it to editorial. Martin, you okay with that?
Martin Thompson, I will want to check that this is fine, but I'll wait for the PR.
Okay. Yeah, we can wait until the PR and then flip it.
Okay. We can just remind ourselves that the
yeah,
intention was to flip
and I'll
to
get this
editorial.
PR out this week as well.
Okay. Maybe record that in the issue that the intent is to flip to editor. Yes, thank you. That takes us to 2541. Clients cannot abandon initial packets while server.
See previous discussion about discarding keys.
Okay.
Various things.
That's one of that cluster. Right. 2496 quick version ossification.
You got a presentation, Nicker?
This has slides. Do you
This
want me
has
there or
slides.
here?
Can we do it in half an hour?
Can we do it in 25 minutes?
We can introduce it.
We should start.
Entirely up to the chairs.
Well, so we have that one, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 issues left. They've all been assigned before.
I mean, this is the big one, right? So this is one of our last big issues, is this version. So I want maybe push it to tomorrow so we can have the presentation and the discussion without needing to rush, and maybe use the 20 minutes now to pile the other ones.
That's fine with me. The other possibility would be to attempt to do it today on theory that we don't have any great solutions and people might come up with something great overnight, but I'm really happy to do either way. The chair's decision.
My only concern is that people might lose state because of.
All right.
I'll put this in the footnote.
Right. We have a decent but not impossible list for tomorrow. I think you missed a couple while you were away. Where does that leave us? Sorry. Right, there it is. 2084, discuss requirement that connection IDs not be correlatable. And this was raised and I believe owned by Ecker. Where are we at with this, Ecker?
I promised to write text. Oh, well, I'll just write text. This seems like, I think this was the right text thing.
Right.
I'll try to do that. I'll try to do it now.
Now, like this week now?
Now, like, depending on what the rest of the issues are, maybe right now.
Okay. Please do. Yeah. 2170, embed quick version and expansion, opened by Ecker, owned by MT.
I think we came to the conclusion that no action was needed. Martin and I don't agree on the taste, but it's not. It's just status quo bias.
Yeah. So I didn't understand that.
Close, please.
Close, please.
Close, please. All right, we'll do that by the normal process. Anyone have any objection to that here in the room? Okay, we'll take it to the list, do a consensus call. Thank you. Eric, are you going to get up about that one or this one?
The next one.
Okay, good. Be more conservative about migration. Open, open, open. There we go. Assigned to you, opened by Ecker.
Yeah,
Take it away.
so I sent a PR for this. There's a lot of discussion on this issue about a whole bunch of stuff that has been addressed by other issues. So the final thing we talked about in the interim was basically we should have a threat model for migration of what we think different attackers can and cannot do. And so this is purely documenting the capabilities that we think exist today. If we don't like them, we should open an issue to change those capabilities. But this should not be any new information. It's things that are stated elsewhere in the draft and collected. So the contents of the PR are also right there on the issue, so we don't have to look at a diff to read it.
Okay. Yeah, that looked a little more friendly.
But so it basically, I can go through it in about 2 minutes. You have two, which kind of turn into three types of attackers. There's somebody who's on your path, and that's like a middle box that's routing your packets. And that's great because they can do anything they want to your packets, like not let them go through. And that's a problem. So they can inspect packets, modify packet headers. Obviously, they can't change what's inside the ciphertext. They can inject new packets. They can delay the packets randomly or with purpose, and they can drop the packets. So that's somebody who's on path. Somebody who is off path has the ability to see the packets going by. So they basically have a tap into somebody's forwarding them your packets, or they can observe them some other way. They can't cause those packets to be dropped or delayed or modified in any way, but they can copy them and inject them with their own modifications. So now you have two packets, which might either be the same or subtly different. And of course, they can see all the external bits of the packets. An off-path attacker, I should have titled that on-path attacker, my bad. A limited on-path attacker has the ability to inspect packets and modify some of the ones that are going by, but you end up with a situation where somebody has forwarded your packets faster than the original packets were going to get there. So there's two copies of the packet in the network. So the one that's going through them, they can modify, but for example, if they delay it beyond the other copy wins and gets there first. So if you keep scrolling to the guarantees, yes, that one will become much more clear if you're asking about the third one. Yeah. So an on-path attacker can screw you completely because they're on path and you need them to move your packets. And if they don't move your packets, you don't have a connection. So that's pretty much what 1, 2, 3, and 4 say there. There's a little bit more nuance there around migration, where like point 2, if you are an on-path attacker, you are on path for both the path that the connection is currently on and the path that a endpoint is trying to migrate to, you can prevent that migration. However, you should not, and we believe currently cannot, prevent migration to a path for which the attacker is not on path. So if you are on one path but not on the other, you can't stop me from switching to that other one. And point 4 here is kind of the obvious, like, yeah, you can screw up the connection if you delay packets or drop them or something like that. So that's on-path attackers. You're basically screwed because they're on your path. Off-path attackers can race packets, and we make a couple assumptions about an off-path attacker in order to have it be the absolute worst case possible. So an off-path attacker, we're going to, for now, assume has some magical better route to your actual destination, where they can race 100% of your packets and have 100% of those packets get to the server first. We're also going to assume that they have unlimited resources to do things like attack NATs and cause you to rebind and take over your old port on that NAT and get super lucky about which port they end up with. And so we're basically looking for the worst possible thing that could have happened. And in that worst possible case, and we believe it's a fairly rare case, but it is possible that an off-path attacker can take your packets and offer you improved routing to your endpoint, and they can then become what I've named the limited on-path attacker. So they can do that, yeah.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm losing the plot here. An off-path attacker doesn't get copies of your packets, right? They do. Okay, I'm sorry, that was the part. So it's not off-path in the conventional sense.
Sorry, yes.
No, that's fine.
And we should indeed rename it, because there's some other text in here about the difference between an active and a passive attack. And yes, thank you, Gory. So there's this is strictly defined as an active attack, and this is somebody who's getting copies. So yes, this is a man on the side. And I'll actually go through in the PR and rename it more fully. I have a reference to the definitions of those names, and I use them in one place, but it'd be nice to use them everywhere consistently. So yeah, so let's see. Point 2 here, your off-path attacker can forward packets and offer you improved routing, and he will use that improved routing. The difference between at which point they become kind of on-path, which is why I call it limited on-path, because there's still a copy of your packets going over your original path. And so an on-path attacker can just drop your packets, and then you're screwed. A limited on-path attacker can drop your packets, and you're just fine, because the original copy still gets there. So that's the difference there. So for example, if I'm sitting here on the side and forwarding all your packets, I can delay them to slow you down, only as slow as the original one until I start losing the race. And this gets kind of finicky and tricky, so we can draw some pictures and stuff. But let's see. So an off-path attacker should not be able to cause a connection to just straight up close. They should not be able to cause migration to a new path to fail if they can't also observe and get copies and raise packets for the new path. If they can observe that, they can become a limited on-path attacker if you migrate to that new path. And they can also attack a NAT, and that's a pretty gnarly attack there. Yes.
In the interest of time,
That's
maybe
the last point. So we're good.
Well, then
pretty much all of those attacks are already described in the text. This just collects them all into one place.
Okay.
So that is actually the last point.
Thanks. Have people had a chance to look at this?
Probably not. It was last night.
Very recent? Okay. So what we might do is let folks have a chance to catch up with it. And then if there's no further comment, we'll go ahead and see if we can get consensus on the list. Any other thoughts about it right now? Okay. Thanks for doing that, Eric. Next up, Articulate Principles of Definition of Error Codes, 2388, opened by MT and owned by MT.
There is a pull request for this one.
Okay, good.
I would like feedback on that one. 2880. Yeah. I got some positive feedback. None of it was particularly negative, I don't think, although there was a request to do the same for HTTP. HTTP has the distinction of having both connection and stream level error codes. And so it would be slightly expanded text.
Okay.
But this both defines what the principles are and also expands on some of the error handling advice, I guess, we have in the document.
So this was about, the PR is about 2 weeks old.
Yeah, something like
Do you
that.
think it's ready for proposal ready?
I probably should have done that already, yeah.
Okay, go ahead and do that, and we'll go ahead and see if we can get consensus on the list then. If folks haven't had a chance to look at it, please do. Next up, write up our security target against on-path attacks.
This is what Eric was just talking about.
11 hours ago. Oh, okay. It's the same, it's effectively the same text, isn't it?
It's almost the same text. There was some discussion at the previous interim about Ecker building on top of this with some of the other sections that are in there. So there's some TBD in the PR for like, here's a bucket, but that should probably have a separate issue than that one.
Sorry, there was a lot of noise. Did you say it's ready or not?
The current PR covers the migration cases here. My understanding of this issue is it's a security target against an on-path attack for during things like the handshake, etc. And so the current text that is being added has a section for handshake, and the contents is TBD, with the intent that this issue or a similar issue, to be written by somebody in line behind me, can fill that in.
Okay.
Yeah, I can take that and do that relatively quickly. I needed a taxonomy for it, which I had kind of half in my head, which now Eric has done, and so like I can build on that quite quickly. So I'll review his and then write some sections. It sounds like I was writing a new section rather than a PR or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll wait for that. 2205, Jana? Largest act-to-act frame must not decrease.
Ian Sweat, Google. I think we decided that we didn't want to do anything about this. I think this is closed with no action unless I missed. Is that correct, Jana? Can you give me a thumbs up, or do you not remember?
So Ian, doesn't this go to the ECN problem that Jana had on his
Oh, but don't we have a separate issue for that?
Yes, we do. We just discussed it, and Jana said that it was in progress. But
Okay.
I think this was the fix to that problem. Is that right? Can you remind me, Jana?
I think the conclusion was that we were not going to change this PR, this issue, but we were going to document the ECN issue. So no design change on this issue.
There was a resolution document in the other issue.
Yeah, we have a PR in progress. Maybe once that's done, this gets closed with it.
Right.
We discussed on the PR, and I think the PR has the appropriate resolution to the ECN issue. And when we close that, I think we close this along with it.
So my recollection, and it's on the issue, so if I get this wrong, I apologize, was that we would not require that the largest acknowledge continue to monotonically increase. But we would highlight the fact that if it does not, then you run the risk of disabling ECN. And so there would be an encouragement to have the value increase. This is to accommodate all of those absurdly limited devices that only send an acknowledgement for a single packet and things like that.
Yeah,
So,
we're going to add a should there and basically say, spell out the consequences if
Right.
you don't follow the should.
Yeah. Is there anything useful for the working group to discuss right now?
No.
Will we have a proposal?
Yeah, we.
What was useful was airing that and seeing Gori nod, and that was worth the time we spent, I think.
So we'll wait to hear from the editors as when they think they have a proposal ready.
Yeah, the PR should be ready soon. And again, that needs another iteration. We'll get to that soon.
Thank you. Excuse me. Next up, 2342, raised by Igor and owned by some bits flying between here and Eric. Spoof connection migration as a DOS vector.
There's a PR that should be ready to go.
Ready to go? Okay.
Yep. Should already be reviewed. I think Martin needed to click a button on it, but other than that.
Right. Anyone have something they want to discuss about that, or can we just go ahead and try and get consensus on the list? Igor?
Yeah, I think technically the PR is good. It's done. I would add some more clarification of why the servers would want to do it and what clients should do, but it's all editorial. So technically it's ready.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So there were some questions raised about whether or not that transport parameter should exist or didn't. And as part of that, if it continues to exist, we should have some editorial text explaining why it exists and when you would use it. And if it doesn't exist, then we don't need that. So I didn't add that text here because if the outcome of that is it doesn't exist, then there's no point.
Okay. Right. So we're ready to go in terms of try to get consensus. Okay. So we'll go ahead and put that in the next batch of consensus goals then. Thank you. And that takes us to almost the end, 2389. Be clear about the purpose of disable migration. That sounds familiar? Yeah. Okay. So same issue, same resolution. Then finally, 2602. Raised by Jana, assigned to Ian. Idle timeout needs a more description.
Sorry, I meant to write a PR for this. I apologize. I can write one by tomorrow.
So just get to it when you can. Okay. We don't necessarily need it by tomorrow. We just need to see some motion.
Tomorrow was a good time.
Okay. So that takes us to the end of the accepted design issues on the late stage drafts, which is a very specific set of constraints, but still, yay us. We have a number of them that we defer to discuss tomorrow. Hopefully we'll have a nice chunk of time to do so. And then that leads me to believe we might be in a state where those drafts at least will be able to be moving a little bit towards working group last call, or at least stability shortly after we get all those incorporated. I think tomorrow we'll reserve some time at the end to discuss planning, and one of the things we'll talk about is the other drafts, the HTTP and the recovery drafts, getting them into that late stage process. Offline, I think maybe we should talk to the editors about whether there are any HTTP recovery issues that we need to carve out some time for tomorrow, because the ones that we did defer to tomorrow could take a significant chunk of time based on the interrelationships there.
Jana Iyengar, we punted on some issues during the interim from recovery to the IETF because we wanted the broader IETF audience to be present.
Yes.
We should make sure to get to those tomorrow.
Right. All right, then we need to probably go away and come up with a run list for tomorrow that incorporates all those issues we deferred, but leaves time for that and the planning discussion. I think that'll be the bulk of the day. We've got 8 minutes left. I don't know that we can really use that productively unless we want to try and have the planning discussion now.
What do we have in the timetable?
I remember there was a request, but I don't think you got slides. Does anyone have anything that we can productively discuss in now effectively 5 minutes? Sure. Great.
Hi, Brian Trammell, co-editor of the Manageability and Applicability drafts. There are a few open issues on these. You can maybe can you throw them up real quick? Many of these are things for which just before the draft deadline, Miri and I went through and basically put some text in for them. There are some that we will need some help from people. You will see that aside from one of these, which is assigned to, I think that's the picture that means Ian Sweat. Aside from two of these, there are not people assigned. We may be coming to some of you in the hallways and press ganging you into providing us some text for these. If you would like to look through this issue list and see if you can volunteer to add some text, that would be even more pleasant for us and for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. I think it's easy for people to forget that we have these drafts. They are becoming more important, and I think we'll be spending more time on them as the base drafts settle down. So expect to see these more in the next couple of meetings.
And we can take a minute or two also to talk about sort of what the plan would be now going forward for the working group, right? I mean, we still have quite a few issues open. That's all we did today, and we didn't get through them all. There's also still quite a longer list of editorial issues. Some of them are not, spelling fixes, but actually require some work. So there's some work will need to happen on the draft still, but we hope that once the design issues are more or less done, we can, the hope is that the drafts enter a period of stability where maybe editorial stuff gets fixed, but we're not hopefully going to do more design work, and that allows the implementations to catch up. Hopefully this could be after the September-October interim. So we will say what we said before, that maybe in Singapore, if that plan pans out, we can actually spend the session on some things that are not V1 related. And there's quite a few proposals around. I think the ones that certainly seems to draw a lot of interest inside the IETF is things related to RTC Web. There was the whole dispatch thing yesterday, but there's other things that we have, for example, multipath as an item on our charter, which is, it feels like this will be a much harder, much longer term thing, and it's also maybe not quite as urgently needed as the RTC stuff. But RTC could be a topic that we spend a session on in Singapore if you guys stop opening new design issues for a moment. Eric.
Eric Kinnear, Apple. There's also the QuickLB draft, which in my mind is kind of coming with V1, not with the stuff after, and we should probably give that some airtime and ask people to read it.
Correct.
Because that's another one that we've maybe been forgetting exists.
Yeah, that is one that sort of, I feel that this has a natural home in this working group, while the RTC web discussion is a much larger one, right? And there will certainly be, most pieces probably will not be in this working group.
Yes.
Yeah, but by saying we'll spend some time talking about something like RTC Web, it doesn't mean that work will be done here. It just means that we'll start to have a discussion with the community. And we're talking to the area directors about what the proper dispositions of things like extensions versus new applications using Quick might be.
This is Martin Duke. I'm gratified to hear that you believe that this working group is the home for that. However, I remind the chairs that it has not been adopted, and I would very much.
I said it's not a home for it. Potentially not. We still haven't decided what the disposition for things like extensions and new applications using Quick are going to be.
Oh, QuickLB specifically.
Oh, QuickLB specifically, sure.
Yes. So I not probably in Montreal, but I would like certainly in the interim to get some time to discuss it with the group and move for adoption, and then we can iterate further off of there. I think it's important that it at least be an adopted document before we go to RFC with V1, so that people have guidance on how to do this.
Yeah, and I think that the discussion of that is probably a prime thing for Singapore. That sounds like a good idea. Or maybe even at the interim if we have time.
It would probably require some small amount of rechartering, because at the moment we have a pretty specific list of work items, and that isn't one, but we wrote that charter years and years ago when we didn't know about this stuff. I'll make you a deal that we do a call for adoption when you keep your hands off the invariants for a couple of months.
I'm never going to live that down, am I?
Roberto Peon. I do have a bit of a worry that we're going to start discussing RTC, et cetera, before we start discussing what we've currently labeled as V2 features.
Can you go a bit more to the right?
I'm worried that we're going to start discussing WebRTC, et cetera, before we start discussing what are currently labeled as V2 features. Either getting V2 chartered or something like that would be a really good idea before we start discussing WebRTC and Quick in particular. Because otherwise, I think we're going to end up with outcomes that would be very different than what would happen otherwise.
Jan Iyengar, I don't think that the QuickLB draft needs a change in the charter. We already have some text that says we will discuss, specifically the text that says how quick and describing deployment and manageability implications of the protocol. It goes a little bit past just the implications, I guess.
But yeah, let's not lawyer up on charter changes right now. It's just, it may be necessary. We'll have to talk to the EDs.
This is action from Magnus to figure out whether he's comfortable with us just taking that on under the current charter or not. It's really an area director decision whether
Anything else for today? Okay, we'll see everyone tomorrow, hopefully, and continue the good pace of work. Thank you. Oh, that's premature.
You haven't signed the blue sheets yet, you can come up, and you can also bring them, at least one of them is still out there somewhere.
How's it going? Nice to meet you. I'm Kyle. From the UNH Interruptibility Lab.
Hi, how you going?
You guys were talking about the interim meeting.
Yeah.
We have space, and we'd be happy to host.
I saw your email. Yeah, thanks for
Yes,
that.
Tim Winter sent me.
I think it's a matter of finding whether we get an appropriate room, and whether it's Logan's prep before people get there.
Yeah.
What's your nearest major airport?
Logan in Boston.
Boston. And how long does it take to get there?
45 minutes, hour? 45 minutes.